I've been a web developer for 22 years, and I helped co-found NPM Inc. My current job title is COO, but don't take that title too seriously. I'm a founder. They have to give me a C title. That one happened to be lying around. What I am is a web developer. And I'm here to talk to you about NPM, because you're all React developers. I'm going to be talking to you about the bits of NPM that are especially relevant to you as React developers, not just a sort of random NPM talk. The first part of this talk is going to be a bunch of data that NPM knows about you that I hope will give you a sense of sort of React's place in the ecosystem. And the second part is about NPM itself, especially new features that can help you build better, safer software. But wait, I'm hearing you think, I use Yarn. Why is the NPM guy here? What the fuck are we listening about NPM? Like the last speaker was just like Yarn at whatever. A lot of you do use Yarn, especially in the React community. Yarn is very popular. And we are big fans of Yarn and the people who make it. But Yarn is an alternative client to the NPM registry. Yarn doesn't run its own registry. So every Yarn user is a NPM user as well. So a lot of the data that we have about what we would call an NPM user is about a bunch of people who are actually using Yarn on the command line. So it doesn't really matter. We still know who you are. You're still using our stuff. Don't worry about it. However, we did used to say that it didn't matter which client you were using because it's open source. Use whatever you prefer. But we can no longer say that with a straight face. As I'm talking about NPM, I'm going to mention a couple of ways in which NPM has changed since the introduction of Yarn to reflect the features that Yarn introduced into the community. And I'm also going to mention some of the ways that Yarn has drifted away from what NPM can do. But I'm not here to bash Yarn. That is definitely not what I am here to do. We are big fans of Yarn. The people who make Yarn are wonderful, friendly people who are great open source citizens, and we're on really great terms, so I'm not here to start drama. I'm here to make friends and maybe teach you some useful stuff. The title of this talk was 10 things that you don't know about Yarn, but that was when I thought it was going to be a 10-minute lightning talk, and then I looked at the schedule and they were like, oh, it's a 20-minute talk now, so I threw in twice as much stuff. So there's like 28 things that some of you won't know about Yarn, and I'm hoping that every one of you gets at least 10 of them that you didn't already know. So that's how we're getting to the 10. What you probably already know is that NPM is extremely popular these days. There are 10 million people using the NPM registry on a regular basis, and they download more than 6 billion packages every single week. We think about 85% of people who program JavaScript in any way are already using NPM, and that number is rising rapidly to 100%. And the result of all of these people using NPM all the time is that we have an awful lot of data about what is going on in the world of JavaScript. And that means that we can turn that stuff into useful information that can help you. So the data that I'm talking about today came from two primary sources. One was 1.5 billion requests a day that hit our servers. We can pull data out of that. We can tell you what's trending up and what's trending down. And also, we asked you directly. We ran a survey in January of 16,000 people who use NPM or Yarn and got your answers about what you're up to. And the results have been really fascinating. So I'm hoping to help you write better software by knowing about what is going on in the ecosystem. One reason I do talks like this is that NPM users are mostly very new. Most people who use NPM have been using NPM for less than 2 years. The JavaScript community is also growing very rapidly, but there are still a whole bunch of people who've been doing JavaScript for quite a long time who are only just getting onto the NPM ecosystem. So in any given crowd, especially a crowd like this, most of you have, like, half of you have only just started using NPM, really. So there's lots of stuff that people who've been using NPM for 4 or 5 years now are like, yeah, everybody knows that. No. There's lots of stuff that people are just like, I only heard about NPM install. I didn't know about any of these other things. The next thing is that NPM is being used everywhere JavaScript is being used. And JavaScript is being used everywhere. Obviously, people are building a lot of websites in JavaScript, but people are building server-side applications in JavaScript. People are building mobile apps and desktop apps in React Native. There are people doing robotics and IoT in JavaScript, and all of these people are using NPM packages to do it. And the interesting part is a lot of these people are using the same NPM packages to do it. There are copies of Lodash built into hardware these days, which is a strange and shocking thing to realize. And that's even more amazing because JavaScript is, by a lot of measures, the most popular programming language in the world right now. It is the biggest language on GitHub by a long way. 70% of Stack Overflow developers report using JavaScript at least some of the time. So if you put those numbers together and you do the math, it's possible that more than 50% of all programmers are using NPM. Not all JavaScript programmers. All programmers of any kind are using modules from the NPM ecosystem. But above all, NPM is for web developers. 93% of people who use NPM report that they are using it to put together web pages. That's not all they're doing. Lots of them are doing server-side stuff as well, but that is a huge change in how NPM thinks about itself. NPM thought of itself as the node package manager, the thing to put together APIs and stuff on the server side, and that's not what we are. NPM is the way that you build websites in 2018. In fact, for a modern web app, especially a React app, on average, about 97% of the code in your application is code that you downloaded from NPM, and you wrote only the last 3%. That is a wonderful vindication of a module ecosystem. It means that nearly everything that was boring was done by somebody else, and you got to write only the last little bit that was interesting and specific to your application. That is a triumph of open source. Or if you are somebody who's not so much into JavaScript as me, a sort of terrifying idea that 97% of your code is not yours. I'm about to show you some data using a metric that we use internally called the share of registry. It is about how relatively popular things are in the NPM registry. And the reason we use it is because using absolute measures of popularity on the NPM registry is extremely misleading, because about 10% more people start using NPM every month than the month before. Everything in NPM is growing all the time. Even the shittiest packages on NPM are constantly getting more users because there's just more people showing up all the time. Like tens of thousands of people show up all the time and are like, I don't know what I'm doing. Let me download this obviously evil malicious module. So instead we use our relative measure. This is a graph of Express. Both of these blue lines are Express. The one on the left is Express as an absolute measure. It's growing incredibly quickly. It's going up and to the right. And the one on the right is our share of registry metric, which shows that while Express used to be 1.5% of all downloads all by itself, now Express is something like 0.1% of downloads. Express is still way more popular than it used to be. It is getting 4.8 million downloads a week, but a whole bunch of other packages showed up. So relative to the total registry, Express's popularity is about flat. So in all of these graphs, I'm going to use this same metric. So if you see something that looks flat, that means it's growing like gangbusters. And if you see something that is going up and to the right, then it is growing unbelievably quickly. It's growing faster than that blue line that is Express on the left. So let's look at React. React is goddamn running away with the web. 60% of people who write websites say that they are writing React apps these days. 60%, and it's growing super fast as well. But the interesting thing about this is that in the last 9 months or so, it seems to have slowed down a little bit. It's not runaway growth anymore. It's not explosive growth. So is that temporary? We're going to look a little bit further into that. One obvious thing to check is whether React's growth is being slowed by people adopting Preact. This one on the left is Preact. As you can see, it is growing very nicely. But in absolute terms, Preact is that tiny little red line down at the bottom. It's far too small to be making the difference to React's growth that we're seeing there. As everybody knows, React is a way of making components that share state, and there are lots of types of applications that find reusable components that share state useful. So there's mobile apps, desktop apps, rich web apps, and React is used in all of those domains. And that's part of why React is so popular, but rich web apps in particular, they need a way to map state to a URL, and that is what React Router is obviously for. As you can see, React Router, which is the red line here, grew really quickly, and then it sort of leveled off, much like React did. But the interesting part of it is that it leveled off at about half the level of React itself. And that is one of the triumphs of React, that the developers of React successfully decoupled the concept of your modules from your router in a way that in my experience, no web framework had done before. Every other framework had its own component model, its own data model, its own everything. And this much more flexible design has resulted in much greater popularity. The reason that React can be so popular is because you don't have to buy into every single thing that the React developers built all at once. You can just use React and a bunch of other stuff that you pick. Speaking of React's decoupled model, let's look at Flux. Flux was released roughly about the same time as by Facebook. It was coupled with GraphQL. Flux was sort of how Facebook was expecting people to use React's data model. And as you can see, that didn't happen at all. Imagine if Facebook had coupled these two things together. Imagine if you couldn't use React without also using Flux. The unpopularity of Flux would have dragged React down with it, and that didn't happen. Instead, what happened was that people used Redux. As soon as Redux became available, Flux immediately began to decline in popularity, and Redux exploded in popularity until it got to basically the same level of popularity as React Router, and then it stuck there. In fact, they track each other really well because that combination of those two is so popular. Another thing that NPM knows about React users is that you use transpilers. No surprise there. And the most popular one is Babel, also not a huge surprise. Babel translates JavaScript into other types of JavaScript, except for JSX, which isn't really part of JavaScript. But if you think about the situation we're in, where 60% of people who are doing websites are all using React, and like nearly all of them are using JSX and Babel to do that, there begins to be a case that we should be making to browser manufacturers, which is JSX should be part of JavaScript. And I don't know why it isn't. And JavaScript purists are like, but there's syntactic ambiguities. I'm like, I have been in web development for 22 years. We have fixed much worse problems than the syntactic ambiguities introduced by making JSX part of JavaScript. As you can see, ClojureScript and Elm are sticking in there. Coffee is in there. But the really big surprise in those numbers is TypeScript. 46% of people who use NPM say that they're using TypeScript. I mean, to 46% of you, that's not a surprise, but to the other 54% of you, like, what the hell? Where did that come from? TypeScript is a very simple tool. It adds types to your JavaScript, which means, and types are basically just a form of built-in testing. It means that large teams work better together. It's a simple and non-controversial idea that I think adds a lot of value. Microsoft launched TypeScript with its own package manager for its type definitions, and the people who used TypeScript at the time hated it. They were like, why do we have to use two package managers? This is annoying. Sounds like a familiar problem. And so Microsoft, to their credit, was like, OK, and they put all of their types into NPM, and now NPM is the package manager for TypeScript. That is very new Microsoft of them. Congratulations. And they also did it without asking us if that would be OK, which is very old Microsoft of them. But it's cool, and we're happy that they did. And there are lots of good ways to use React and TypeScript together, so it's probably worth investigating. So now we're going to move on to part 2. And before I do that, people who have seen me talk before know that I like to do this thing with Team A and Team B. So everybody on this side of the line is Team A. Everybody on this side of the line is Team B. Let's hear it from Team A. Let's hear it from Team B. Team A again. Team B again. Excellent. I'm not going to do anything with that. It's just I've been showing you graphs for 10 minutes, so I want you to, I need to make sure that you're still awake. The current version of NPM is version 6. If you're still on version 3 or 4, you are woefully behind the times, and like 30 or 40% of you are. The current version of NPM is 20 times faster than version 4 was. And that by itself should give you a reason to upgrade. And obviously the question in all of your minds is, well, is it faster than Yarn? And the answer is yes, it is faster than Yarn. Or more accurately, all of the package managers are roughly the same speed now. And the reason that happened is because of the way open source works. When everybody realized that there were huge efficiency gains to be made in package managers as a result of Yarn, all of the package manager makers started talking to each other. They created a place called package.community, and they all started collaborating, and they all started finding the low-hanging fruit and sharing code and sharing ideas and sharing techniques. And as a result, all of the package managers got a lot faster in the last 2 years. But as a result, they're now basically all the same speed because all of the low-hanging fruit is gone. So sometimes NPM is a little faster, sometimes Yarn is a little faster, but really not so much that you would notice anymore. And part of the reason this happened is one of the big changes in NPM 6, which is that NPM 6 locks by default. Installing with NPM 6 creates a package lock JSON, which means that what you get on your development box is exactly what you get on your production box. And this is essential when you're dealing with big trees. Most web apps these days have very big trees. Most web apps have something like 1,000 modules in them, and 2,000 modules is not at all uncommon. And obviously, this was Yarn's idea. They didn't invent lock files. Ruby had them for years, but Yarn was the innovation that showed us at NPM that this was going to be necessary, because Facebook ran into this problem before anybody else did, or before a lot of other people did, because Facebook was writing such a complicated JavaScript application, and so they had big trees before we did. The reason a lock file works is it prevents unexpected changes coming into your tree. Semantic versioning is supposed to prevent unexpected changes from landing in your tree anyway, but it doesn't always work. And if you have 10 modules in your tree, the chances of that happening are low. If you have 1,000 modules in your tree, that happens basically every time. So lock files become essential in this new big tree world that we're in. So Yarn introduced Yarn lock. And that introduced a big performance boost, because previously, NPM, whenever it downloaded a package, would check the server to find out if there were any better versions of the package, and then it would download the package. And if you're using a lock file, you don't need to check, because you're only going to accept the version in your lock file anyway, so it throws away half of the requests that you're making, and as a result, it gets twice as fast. And that's just what everybody did. Everybody switched to lock files. Everybody threw away half of the HTTP requests they were making. Every package manager got twice as fast. Another small change, but a nice one, is that NPM saves by default. I don't know why that wasn't always the default. That was dumb of us. NPM 6 introduced a command called npm CI. If you are running your builds in a continuous integration environment, continuous integration environments are weird in a predictable way. They don't have a node modules folder. A bunch of other stuff is true that we can assume. So we can throw out a bunch of code, and you can run an npm install that is twice as fast as a normal npm install without any impact, as long as you know that it's running in a CI environment. So if you want to get builds that are twice as fast, on top of the 20 times faster that I already said, you can just switch any place where you're using install to CI. As NPM's got bigger, security has become an even bigger concern for us. So earlier this year, NPM acquired Lyft Security, which was a new one for us. We've never acquired anyone before. And the first thing that we did was incorporate the NSP project directly into NPM so that everybody starts getting security audits built into every time they do an install. The first of the security features we released was an obvious one. We did two-factor auth. If you are a package author of any kind, you should absolutely be using two-factor auth to make sure that nobody can publish a package while pretending to be you. And in May, we launched quick audits. This is what NSP looks like when it's integrated into NPM. If you've used NPM itself, then you've probably seen them already. Every time you run install, NPM will report to you how many packages you just installed have security vulnerabilities of any kind. This works in nearly every version of NPM, but in NPM 6, the warnings are a little bit better. And you may think, well, React is a client-side application, and all of these vulnerabilities are about server-side applications. Why would I need security auditing? Well, it's not true. React does an excellent job of doing XSS protection by itself, but it is not infallible. In fact, in the last 3 months, there have been 2 major XSS vulnerabilities reported, one in React SVG and one in React Marked Markdown, both of which would impact React users. React users are also targeted directly. Scammers publish packages that look like useful React modules to the NPM registry. They find botnets and do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of false downloads to make them look popular, and then they publicize them to people, and actually they're malicious packages. We do our best to find these things and shut them down, but the way that we shut them down is we flag them in NPM. So if you don't have auditing, you're not going to know that we found them. At the moment, we're doing about 3.5 million scans a week. The stats aren't great. About half of the packages that people download are currently have some kind of vulnerability. 11% of them have critical vulnerabilities, which means you should be stopping everything and fixing them. But fortunately, improving that has got a lot easier because NPM Audit exists. NPM Audit will give you detailed reports of all of the vulnerabilities in your application, which packages, and most importantly, how to fix them, which is usually just upgrade to a secure version. The funny part of that is if NPM is just saying that, our advice is that you should run NPM to upgrade this thing to make it do it, why doesn't NPM just follow its own advice and run NPM? So we did. NPM audit fix will automatically fix anything in your application that could be fixed by running an update. If you just run audit fix, it will bring in Semver compatible updates. If you run audit fix -- force, it will bring in breaking changes, which means that you will then need to run your tests and make sure that everything is still happening. But it does take an awful lot of the grunt work out of making sure that your application remains secure. And this is why we no longer recommend using Yarn, because it's a big, scary world out there. There's 10 million people using NPM. When you have 10 million users, a certain percentage of them are going to be evil. And when it's 10 million people, that percentage is a lot of people. So we believe it is absolutely imperative that JavaScript programmers start taking security more seriously than we've historically done, and that is why we've spent all of this time building all of these tools. How am I doing for time? I have no idea. I'm way over time? Okay. I'm nearly done. Another big change in NPM recently is that we shut down our GitHub issue tracker. I know that's a little bit scary to say when I'm standing in GitHub's offices. We love GitHub. But the issue tracker just wasn't scaling to meet our needs, so we moved to a discourse, which is at npm.community. It is a great place to track bugs, find feature fixes, and help each other solve your problems with NPM. NPX is another feature of NPM. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip it, but it is amazing. I have given whole talks on NPX. It will save you tons of time. NPM init now understands what NPM yarn create does. You can just npm init a React app, and it will do exactly what yarn create React app does. There's one feature we don't have yet, which is workspaces. Workspaces are coming by the end of the year if they are a big feature for you. And the one last thing that you should know, and I tell you this because people keep asking, is how does NPM make money? Are you people some kind of charity? And I'm like, fuck no, it costs millions of dollars to run the NPM registry. Did you see that downloads graph? It is so much bandwidth and so many servers. We earn that money by selling services that NPM developers love, like security services and private packages, and you should really check those out. Obviously, as you can tell, since I'm way over time, I could go on and on and on about all of the features of NPM that people have not quite cottoned on to the fact that they exist yet. But what I will say is that NPM is for web developers, and React is dominating the web, which means that NPM is for you. If you are having issues with NPM, you should know that as a React developer, you are a first-class citizen within the ecosystem of NPM. We are here to fix your problems for you. We care about the edge cases you're running into. Don't just run NPM and go, oh, it's broken, I hate this. Get in touch with us because you are 60% of the NPM user base, and we want to make sure that everything is working for you. So thank you all for being so patient, and thank you.
All right, thank you, Laurie. Way to get through that.